We're hearing that thousands of Israelis have joined a protest in Jerusalem, accusing the Prime Minister of undermining democracy and restarting the offensive in Gaza without regard for the hostages still held by Hamas. Well, for more on all this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So the end of the ceasefire in the Middle East after Israel's renewed airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. Why has Israel gone back to war in Gaza?
Well, we didn't want to, but Hamas were refusing to release more terrorists. They refused releasing more hostages. They were refusing the proposals that were on the table. We saw that the US envoy Steve Witkoff put two proposals on the table. The mediators put proposals on the table, and Hamas refused all of those. They said they weren't willing to release hostages, and they were dragging out negotiations without any serious attempt to move it forward.
So basically, these attacks resumed after Hamas refused demands to renegotiate the ceasefire on Israeli terms. Hamas wanted to stick with the original agreement and timetable and move to the second phase that would have required Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. How do you defend the fact that Israel signed onto that second phase and is now, in effect, reneging on that agreement?
Well, I don't believe we are reneging on the agreement. If you look at the actual small print of the agreement, I think it's Clause 8 and Clause 13. I need to remember exactly. But in there it says that each side will present its position for negotiations. And Hamas's position was that they wanted to remain in the Gaza Strip, they wanted to remain in control with their weapons and to carry on preparing for further attacks against Israel. And so when that's their basic demand, there's no real negotiation and no real contact. So for them, they were planning on dragging this out for weeks, for months, for years, for however long they could, all the time rearming. We have evidence that Hamas were planning further attacks against our troops. They were planning further attacks against Israeli communities inside Israel, October the 7th style. And so we launched this attack in order to stop that. And we also know that Hamas only come to the negotiating table when they feel under military pressure. They did it in the first one, they did it in the second one, and in order to bring them back to the table to be serious, we believe that this is the way to do that.
Well, I mean, you said that Hamas failed to keep its side of the deal, in effect, and that you're acting in the interest of the hostages. And yet the Hostages and Missing Families Forum in Israel has accused the government of a complete deception by pulling out of a deal that could have brought everyone home. How can you be acting on behalf of the hostages when many of their families are clearly in despair about the decisions your government has taken?
My heart goes out to the families of the hostages. It really does. And I can't even begin to imagine what they're going through and the distress and the terror and the heartache and all of those things. But if you look across the leadership in Israel, including the military leadership, including people who traditionally haven't agreed necessarily with the Prime Minister, including the former Defense Minister who Prime Minister Netanyahu fired, they've all said that they believe this is the right decision in order to bring Hamas back to the table, because whilst the families are desperate to see their loved ones come home, as am I desperate to see them come home, Hamas weren't prepared to have a negotiation and to have a conversation. And so if that would have gone on for another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and they still weren't coming home, we wouldn't have achieved anything that way either. So I think that this is the more difficult of choices, but we hope in the short run, it will prove to be the more effective and will bring the hostages home quicker.
Well, I mean, there is a massive protest taking place in Jerusalem at the moment. I mean, those people are saying that you've got it wrong.
And you know, that's the beauty of living in a democracy, that there are people who disagree, and it's not a country where everybody has to agree with the Prime Minister and everybody has to say that he's right. There is a legitimate debate and a legitimate discussion about the best way in order to bring our hostages home. What isn't in disagreement is, even if you're with the government or you're protesting against the government, everybody agrees that 59 hostages need to come home and that Hamas can never be in a position again to carry out what happened on October the 7th.
But you're going to kill them all. I mean, the attacks that you're carrying out are not attacks that I mean, you can't say incontrovertibly that they are safe. I mean, you're attacking Gaza, and they could be anywhere.
Well, we have very good intelligence. You're right, it's never 100%. But you know, we saw in these attacks yesterday the people that were killed. The vast majority of them, despite what Hamas may be saying, the vast majority of them were military. They were terrorists. They were commanders. They were mid and senior level commanders. They were people who were involved in the day-to-day running of Hamas and controlling the Gaza Strip. And that's the vast majority of the people that were killed in those attacks. And we did that with very pinpoint accuracy and very pinpoint information and intelligence. And so I believe that our intelligence has a very good understanding of where the hostages are located,
right,
and is doing everything to avoid attacking in those areas.
Pinpoint accuracy? I mean, we've seen pictures, we can't show them on air because they're just too horrific. We've seen pictures of little children who've been killed. We've seen pictures of women. We've seen pictures from the United Nations talking today about their compound being attacked and at least 2 of their workers getting killed.
Well, the Israeli army, in our initial check, has said that we didn't carry out any attack on the United Nations compound. And so I would be very wary before we go into...
A lot of international news organizations, including respected ones, the BBC and all the rest of them, have verified the footage.
Well, I'm not arguing that people weren't killed there. I'm just saying it may not have been from an Israeli attack. Remember, we saw at the beginning of this war on the Al-Hilal hospital compound, everybody came out immediately and said, Israel's done this, Israel's done that. And it turned out after a couple of hours and after a couple of days that actually it was a misfiring Hamas rocket that landed on the hospital, and was that did the damage. So I would say let's wait on that. But in terms of the women and children, unfortunately in a war and in these attacks, they are killed, and it's tragic. Don't ask me to say that I'm not upset by that. I'm devastated by it. I don't want these women or children to die. A Palestinian innocent woman and a Palestinian innocent child are no more innocent or than an Israeli.
But I think the big question here is whether Israel knowingly attacks places where it's pretty sure that there are women and children. If, for example, you see a Hamas commander and he's in his house with his wife and children, you still go ahead and attack him and kill everybody there.
Well, it's an interesting moral question, and I genuinely ask that moral question. If you have a Hamas commander who you know is at that moment planning an attack on Israeli civilians or planning an attack on Israelis in some way and is going to carry that out and kill many Israelis, and he deliberately puts himself with his wife and children because he knows that Israel will do everything in its power to avoid those women and children, then is it legitimate for us to carry out that target? And by the way, international law...
Well, that's against international law.
Well, international law is not clear on this, by the way. If there is a clear military advantage and the person has deliberately put themselves and surrounded by civilians, then it's all about whether or not that proportionality is okay.
Well, international law doesn't support that.
I
can certainly put my imprimatur on that. But let's move on from that, because I wonder if you can talk to us about Itamar Ben-Gvir. Is it confirmed that he's returned as National Security Minister? I understand his return has been approved by the government.
Yeah, last night it was approved unanimously by the government for him to return.
Well, we've seen the Times of Israel quoting the Attorney General's office saying that it was legally not possible to once again appoint Mr. Ben-Gvir as National Security Minister. Why is it going ahead?
Well, firstly, it's an advice piece that she's provided. It will be challenged in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will make a ruling on the issue. In the meantime, the government was given legal advice. We both know that legal advice you can either listen to or you can ignore, or you can get different legal advice that says something different. And the government has decided that in this instance they will wait for a Supreme Court ruling. So we will wait and see if there is a Supreme Court that says something. But at the moment, there's certainly no legal objections in order to be able to stop that appointment.
It's an interesting position, though, isn't it? I mean, having a national security minister who has had his own legal problems in the past, but more importantly, Mr. Ben-Gvir left the coalition because he didn't like the ceasefire and hostage and prisoner release deal, which was signed with Hamas, and Israel did sign that agreement. He said he'd come back if fighting resumed. Presumably, one of the things we can take from all of this is that fighting has well and truly resumed, and that bombing and the strikes we've seen over the last couple of nights in Gaza are going to continue.
Well, I hope they won't continue. That will depend on Hamas. If Hamas agree to release the hostages, if Hamas come back and agree to the proposals that are on the table and are serious, then there will be another ceasefire. There is certainly no guarantee that this will carry on. This is an attack that will increase in its intensity as until Hamas agrees to come and have a serious conversation and release the hostages.
In other words, until they agree to do it from Israel's perspective.
Well, it's not Israel's perspective.
Well, I mean, you signed an agreement.
Right, but the agreement that we signed said that both sides would negotiate through where were we going to go from there.
Yeah, but you're not negotiating.
We did. Well, no, but we were negotiating, and Hamas said, we're not prepared to give up our power, we're not prepared to give up our arms, and we want the right to be able to rearm. And during this whole time of the ceasefire, Hamas was rearming, they were rebuilding their troops, they were planning further attacks, and they weren't in any way in good faith in these negotiations. They were using them as an excuse to rearm, to attack us. And therefore, we had to take the action that we took. Steve Witkoff, who is as you know, is the US envoy. He put two proposals on the table. Hamas turned them down. President Trump warned only in the last 48 hours, your time is running out. Do not think time is on your side. You need to come to agree to some of these. The mediators put other proposals on the table. Everybody put proposals, and Hamas refused every single one of them. Israel accepted the Witkoff proposals. Hamas refused them. Okay, when it became clear that there was no possibility of moving forward because Hamas's position was, we want to stay in power, we want to keep our arms, we want to carry on attacking Israel, it was clear that wasn't going to be a long-term negotiation. And therefore, Steve Witkoff put a proposal on the table. Israel accepted it, even though it wasn't perfect for us, and Hamas rejected it.
Well, according to what Hamas told us directly, they said they're ready to relinquish power as soon as possible. Nevertheless, what does the breakdown of this truce mean for hopes of a lasting peace?
Well, I think the question is for Hamas, not for us. And I say that because it's Hamas that
you're the one who's attacking them.
Right,
they're not attacking you, you're attacking them.
But if tomorrow morning Hamas release the hostages and put down their arms, it's over. We have no territorial desire, no territorial on Gaza. We're not interested in being in Gaza. We left in 2005. We want a peaceful border with Gaza, but Hamas cannot be there. And if Hamas will release the hostages, lay down their arms, it's over tomorrow. You know, I laughed when we were talking about when hearing the Hamas representative. I mean, I laughed, but it was tragic. He was talking about women and children. This is a terror organization who, on October the 7th, burnt children alive, burnt whole families alive, tortured. They know what terrorism is. And again, an organization that is willing to torture, to rape, to butcher, and to burn alive is more than capable and willing to lie to you as well.
I want to thank you very much indeed, Michael Freeman, for coming in and talking to us. Michael Freeman, of course, is Israel's ambassador to Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.